Hi everyone, this is Family History and Genealogy with Ian. I am here with another episode. This episode will focus on my paternal line, specifically my father's mother, my grandmother's maternal line. Uh, as I have said in other videos, these videos are a series of videos to show you my family history and the story behind my family, and encourage you to do your own family history and discovery yourself. So today we're going to focus on the person of Elizabeth Garrison. Elizabeth Garrison is my grandmother's great grandmother, and she was born enslaved in Alamance County, North Carolina, in the year 1849. She was born to an enslaved woman by the name of Melvina Moore and to a white man with potential mixed race heritage by the name of George Garrison. So George Garrison on the 1860 census is listed as owning about 6 enslaved persons, including a Melvina Moore, and his race is listed as white. Also on the 1860 census, his daughter is listed as an Elizabeth Garrison, and her age is listed as around the age of 14. George Garrison was Elizabeth's father. He was listed as a white man on the 1860 census, and he owned about 6 enslaved persons. Also in that 1860 census, his daughter was listed as an Elizabeth Garrison, and she was age 11. So my ancestor, Elizabeth Garrison, is the daughter of a George Garrison who was a slave owner as well as listed as white on the 1860 census. Elizabeth herself on that census was listed as white as well. However, on the 1870 census, Elizabeth is listed as a mulatto woman, and she's married to another mulatto person by the name of George Simpson, also of Alamance County. So Elizabeth and George have several children. They have about 8 children. One of those children is a Ora Simpson. Ora Simpson is the mother of my great grandmother, who had the blessing of turning 100 in November of last year, who's the mother of my grandmother. So, what's interesting about this history is that Elizabeth Garrison, who is pictured in, as you see here in this picture, according to the oral history of my family, was a very fair-skinned woman with light eyes who lived with her husband George Simpson. They worked hard, raised all their children, and they owned the land in Alamance County, that they lived. They also passed that land on to their descendants, and many of their descendants lived to be quite old, lived near 90 years, past 100 years. Um, Elizabeth Garrison was the mother of my great great grandmother Ora Simpson, who married a Stokes, and thus had about 8 children herself, whereas my great grandmother, who turned 100 and was a part of that. And so the interesting part of this history is that you can see, even though they were Elizabeth Garrison was born originally in, but then also she married, and her husband owned land, worked as farmers, and she's buried in a CME church in Alamance County. She gave birth to a generation of Simpsons and Garrisons and Stokes in the Alamance and Caswell County areas. So if you are a part of the African American branch of either the Simpsons or the Garrisons or the Stokes of Rockingham and Caswell County, you are potentially a descendant of Elizabeth Garrison Simpson and her husband George Simpson. And you have this history. We have this history of being related to the Garrisons, the white Garrisons or the mixed race Garrisons of Alamance County. And thus we have land potentially still within the family within the Alamance County area to this day. And so the importance of these stories is to show, one, as I have said throughout this series, is that we're more interconnected than we are different, and to show that the 19th century, the 1800s, it was a time of dynamic social change, meaning many people started the century in enslavement, and by the middle of the century, they were no longer enslaved. They went from being those who were owned to being free, to having land and to acquiring land and starting their family histories and family legacies that many of us, many African Americans, including myself and my family, have benefited from today. So today's history was the history of my grandmother's, my paternal grandmother's maternal line, the Stokes Simpsons Garrisons of Alamance and Caswell County. A little bit of history about Alamance and Caswell County. Alamance County was a big slave county where tobacco was traded as well as some other goods. The city of Burlington, which was the central city in Alamance County, was where the railroad was, and a lot of goods transferred through there. And so a lot of the local plantation areas brought their goods to Burlington and to surrounding areas to sell. So you had a lot of major plantations there. Burlington is adjacent to Caswell County to the south, which is to the north of Alamance, and not far from Rockingham County. So essentially, my entire family history has been from Rockingham, Caswell, and Alamance counties, these three counties, which are in the Piedmont region of North Carolina. And so today I shared with you the history and the story of Elizabeth Garrison Simpson and how I am a descendant of this woman who was born in 1849 and who lived into the early 19th century. And her husband established the legacy and the lineage of the Garrison, Simpson, and Stokes of Alamance and Caswell. So Elizabeth Garrison lived from 1849 to 1925, and she worked as a farm laborer and housewife for most of her life. And her husband, George Simpson, was also a farmer. And she raised nearly 10 children uh, in Alamance County, and they went on to move to Caswell and different places, which was a pretty large family, but a pretty average sized family for that time. One of the reasons many of them had several children was to help with the farm work and the labor intensive requirements of running a farm and the daily duties and responsibilities of such. And so she was a well known community person and someone who really passed on not only God to her children, but also an importance of hard work. And so I am a descendant of her through Ora Simpson, one of her daughters, who've been married in Alfred Stokes and had the Stokes, the African American Stokes of Caswell and Rockingham counties, and later on Graves. So this is the story of Elizabeth Garrison. I hope you've enjoyed this story. And this is just a small story, just a little snippet into her history. This woman's life spanned almost 70 years, 7 decades. And so there could be a lot written about her, but based off the historical records that I have from the 1860 census all the way to the 1910 census and the 1920 census, this is the story of Elizabeth Garrison. I hope you enjoyed this. This is a story not of, slavery, but this is a story of someone who was resilient and someone who made a difference and passed on to the next generation, not only land, but also a legacy of strength and resilience despite the odds. And I'm so happy to be a descendant of hers. Next week, we will delve into more history of my family, and I hope you've been enjoying these series. And again, please do your own research. Start with your ancestry tree. Talk to some of your grandparents, great uncles and aunts, people who know a little bit more about the history than you do. Encapsulate that history and share it because others can and will be inspired by your story as you are inspired by it. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Family History and Genealogy with Ian. I hope you enjoyed this brief episode. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.